Welcome to our deep dive into Changi Prison in Singapore. You guys have sent us a really fascinating mix of YouTube videos, kind of showing us both sides, the inmate and officer perspective inside.
Yeah,
This maximum security facility.
it is really interesting to see those contrasting views of the same environment.
Yeah, and that contrast is really what sets the stage for our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at the realities of daily life in Changi, the psychological effects of actually being there, and also how the prison system tries to rehabilitate inmates.
It's a very complex picture, and these YouTube sources provide really unique insights into all of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in. Changi has this global reputation, right?
Absolutely. It's known for being incredibly strict. And I think some of that stems from its history. You know, you think about the Australian PRWs during World War II, and it's got a very strong stance on drug offenses. Those are some of the things people associate with Changi.
For sure. For
Yeah.
sure. It really makes you think about how they try to balance punishment with rehabilitation. There was this one description of the prison that stuck with me, and it said, Spartan, but not an affront to human dignity.
Yeah, that phrase really captures the essence of what they're trying to achieve there. It's not about being cruel for the sake of cruelty. There's this strong sense of order, discipline, but there's also an attempt to maintain some level of humanity.
Yeah. It's a tough balance to strike, especially when you consider what daily life is actually like for an inmate just stuck in a one-man cell.
I mean, just imagine a small, bare room, just a bed, a toilet, and maybe a few personal belongings.
Yeah.
And that kind of isolation can have a really profound impact on someone's mental state.
Absolutely. One inmate even described it as feeling like a pet in a cage.
Wow.
That image really stayed with me.
It's a powerful one, isn't it? And that sense of confinement, I mean, it's just intensified by the strict routines that are in place. Everything is tightly controlled. The master checks, the meal times, even when you get yard time, how long you get it for.
It seems like they're always being watched and always having to stick to the rules.
Yeah, exactly. There's very little room for individual choice or freedom. But amidst this rigid structure, we do see these kind of interesting glimmers of human adaptation. Like, for example, we learned about Matthew, an inmate who actually chooses to sleep on the concrete floor of his cell.
On the floor, why on earth would he do that?
He says it's cooler.
Oh.
It's his way of coping with the intense heat.
Wow, you really have to admire that kind of resourcefulness.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what else they've figured out how to adapt to in there. And speaking of just the basics, let's talk about food. What's it like?
Well, the meals are very basic. I mean, that's putting it lightly. Inmates often describe them as lacking variety, and they always complain about the food being cold.
Yeah, one inmate actually compared it to the food he used to have, like back when he wasn't in prison. He said it was like night and day.
Yeah. And I think that really highlights the loss that they experience, even just on this fundamental level, like food. And that's where those canteen items really come into play.
Right, they can earn points for good behavior and then use those points to buy things from the canteen.
Yeah, exactly. Things like soap or extra food, you know, just these little comforts that make a big difference in an environment like that.
It's like a way for them to regain some sense of control, some individual choice, in a place where so much is just dictated for them.
Precisely. Those little comforts become so much more significant when you have so little freedom. And this whole idea of control, it kind of plays into the work programs that are available at Changi, too.
I've heard a lot about these programs. What's their purpose? What are they trying to do with that?
Well, they're a really important part of the prison's approach to rehabilitation. So inmates can take part in things like, you know, kitchen work, doing the laundry, even art workshops.
So it's about teaching them some practical skills, instilling a sense of discipline.
Exactly. And we actually see a great example of this with Emmanuel, who used to have this history of violence, but through their conflict resolution program, he's actually learned to help other inmates manage their anger.
Wow, that's pretty powerful, that transformation.
It really speaks to the potential impact these programs can have. And alongside work, there's a big emphasis on education at Changi.
They actually have school in the prison.
They do.
Yeah.
Inmates can actually pursue their O-levels or even diplomas. You know, it's a real chance for them to try and better themselves.
Yeah, we hear from these inmates who are really genuinely motivated to use education as a way to, kind of change their lives around.
And what's interesting is there's research that shows education is linked to reducing those recidivism rates. So it's not just about personal growth, it's about giving them the tools to succeed once they're released.
So it benefits everybody in the long run. But of course, prison life isn't just about routines and programs. We've got to talk about that emotional toll of being separated from your family and your loved ones.
Yeah, that's a huge part of their experience. I mean, Inmates only have limited access to family visits and phone calls, and that makes those little moments of connection so incredibly precious.
We hear from Grayson, who's in there for drug trafficking, and how much he misses his wife and daughter.
He talks about how nervous he gets before those phone calls with his daughter. He hasn't seen her in years, and he worries about how to even connect with her.
It's heartbreaking to hear about that yearning for that connection.
It really underscores the human cost of incarceration, you know. It affects not just the individual, but also their loved ones. And this brings us to one of the most, I guess, controversial aspects of Changi, the punishments.
Caning and the death penalty. I mean, those are practices that have drawn a lot of criticism internationally.
Yeah. Caning is used for a variety of offenses, and, you know, inmates describe the physical and psychological pain that comes with that.
Yeah, it's a very stark reminder of the harsh realities of the prison system. And then you have the death penalty, which Singapore is very, very strict about applying, especially with drug-related cases.
We hear about Panner, who's actually on death row right now. His case raises a lot of ethical questions about the use of capital punishment.
It's a very complex issue. And there are very strong opinions on both sides.
Yeah.
You know, the government argues that it's a deterrent and that it's essential for public safety.
And then you have the activist groups who are advocating for abolishing the death penalty completely. They cite concerns about fairness and, you know, the possibility of wrongful convictions.
It's a really, really tough debate, and there are no easy answers. But even with these very harsh realities, Changi does have these programs that are designed to help inmates prepare for release.
Yeah, these pre-release programs, they really focus on giving inmates tools to actually rebuild their lives. So things like skills development, financial literacy, helping them find housing.
Sounds like they're trying to set them up for success once they get back out there.
But even with all this support, there's still a lot of anxiety. Inmates worry about how the world has changed while they've been locked up and if they'll even be able to adjust to all of that.
It's understandable, right? To feel disconnected after being in such a controlled environment for such a long time.
Yeah. This is where community support becomes so crucial, you know, for people to really successfully reintegrate back into society. They're going to need help from folks outside those prison walls.
It makes you realize that their journey doesn't just end when they walk out of those gates.
And that raises a really important question for all of us. What role do we actually play in supporting those who are trying to rebuild their lives after serving their time?
So we've talked about like the strict routines and some of the huge challenges that inmates face. But I'm really curious about something else we saw in these YouTube videos. It's like these glimpses of how resourceful inmates can actually be in this really tightly controlled place.
Yeah, it's amazing like what they can come up with given, you know, the limited resources that they have.
Right. Like we saw those cell searches where the officers were finding all sorts of things, you know,
Wow.
like extra hooks and straws, even things that had been modified or like repurposed for something else completely.
I guess necessity really is the mother of invention. And in Changi, that ingenuity, it really takes on a lot of forms. Take the glue they use for crafting, for example.
Glue. I mean, I can't imagine they're just given like a bottle of Elmer's or something.
You'd be surprised. They actually make it themselves. They use rice.
Wait, rice, like what they eat?
Yeah, exactly that. They've found a way to cook it down into this sticky paste, and it works really well as glue for, you know, paper and other materials.
It's kind of crazy what they can do with so little.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how the human mind is always looking for solutions, always trying to adapt and overcome these obstacles.
It really does. And that resourcefulness, it goes beyond just crafting. We see it in the way they create their own, you know, systems of exchange.
Oh, like what do you mean by that?
Think about those canteen items that they can buy with those points they earn for
Yeah.
good behavior, right?
Right.
Well, those items, they become a form of currency inside the prison.
Ah, so they barter with each other, trading stuff.
Exactly, yeah. So like a packet of instant coffee might be worth, I don't know, a certain number of cigarettes. Or maybe a bar of soap can be traded for a favor, you know? And it creates this whole underground economy, which is really fascinating in its own right.
It makes sense, though. I mean, even in a place that's specifically designed to, like, take away your individual choice, people are still going to find ways to create their own structures. Like, they crave that sense of control.
It's a testament to that human desire for agency, even in like the most restrictive environments. And this kind of brings us back to this to this tension that we see throughout Changi, this push and pull between control and autonomy.
Right, right. So on the one hand, you've got the authorities who are, they need to maintain order, imposing all these rules and doing these regular searches.
And then on the other side, you have the inmates who are finding these creative ways to push back a little, carving out these little spaces where they can express their individuality and try to, get a little bit of control over their lives.
It's like a game of chess. Both sides constantly trying to outmaneuver each other.
Mm.
But there are real serious consequences if an inmate breaks the rules.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they risk losing privileges,
Mm-hmm.
Potentially getting a longer sentence, facing disciplinary action. It's high stakes, and that pressure cooker atmosphere, it really takes its toll on their well-being, mental and emotional.
Yeah, we've already talked about how they feel lonely, and that separation from families, those psychological effects of just being confined. It's a lot to handle.
And it's worth noting that Changi actually does offer some mental health support to the inmates. Like, they have counselors and psychologists.
Okay, so there is at least some acknowledgement of the mental health challenges that they face.
There seems to be. They encourage inmates to talk about what they're going through, to process their emotions and, try to develop some coping mechanisms. And that's really important for rehabilitation because it addresses not just their actions, but also like those underlying issues that may have led them to where they are.
So it's not just about punishment. They're trying to actually help them work through some of these mental and emotional things as well.
It seems so, yeah. And I think it's through this lens that we can maybe start to better understand the experiences of, individual inmates like Grayson and Kai, whose stories we'll get into next.
Yeah, their stories, I think, are really going to bring to life a lot of those complexities that we've been talking about.
Their journeys are both really unique and offer a lot of valuable insight into the human impact of life inside Changi.
So we've really covered a lot in our deep dive into Changi Prison. We've seen the environment, the routines, the challenges, but now I think it's time to really bring it all to life through those stories of, a couple of individual inmates.
Yes. Grayson and Kai, their experiences, as we saw in those videos, really offer those very different perspectives on what life is like inside.
Grayson, he's the one serving 8 years for drug trafficking.
Right. And it was his first offense, which makes his story even more, poignant, I guess. What really struck me about Grayson was just how much he focused on his family. He talked constantly about his wife and daughter and how much it hurt to be separated from them.
You can really feel that longing for connection and even guilt over, how his actions have affected them. It makes you realize that imprisonment doesn't just impact the individual,
Yeah.
It ripples outwards, affecting those entire families.
He really treasures those phone calls, those letters, those brief moments of contact, like they were the most precious things in the world.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I remember that scene where he's preparing for that phone call with his daughter. You could just feel his anxiety.
He hasn't seen her in years.
Yeah.
And he's trying to figure out how to bridge that gap, what to say to her. It's just such a strong reminder of those emotional complexities of these situations.
Yeah, it's tough to watch. But it also shows his desire to change. Like he wants to be a better father and husband when he gets out.
Yeah. And that's reflected in his commitment to those programs inside the prison. He's actively involved in mindfulness practices, that family violence intervention course. Like, he's determined to confront his past mistakes and find new ways of being.
Yeah, he's really trying to use this time to transform himself, to equip himself for a future where he can, actually be a positive presence in his family's life. And then we have Kai, and his story takes us to a much darker place.
Kai, he faces a lot of challenges. He's in there for a long time, limited family support, and you can just feel that sense of regret and hopelessness.
He seems to be grappling with so much anger and frustration.
There's that scene where he talks about wanting to end his life. It's just a chilling reminder of the despair that can, just overwhelm you in an environment like that.
It's a lot to take in.
Mm-hmm.
And what really stood out to me about Kai was that mistrust he had for everyone. Even the officers.
He pushed back against all those programs. He was convinced they couldn't help him. It seems like he built all these walls up to protect himself from more disappointment.
Right. But then there's this turning point. He starts to open up to Sergeant Mutan, the prison officer, who shows him that real empathy, that respect.
And that moment of just genuine human connection, it seemed to be so important for Kai. It allows him to actually to actually access the support that's available, to participate in things like art therapy. He even becomes a peer supporter for other inmates.
It makes you think about how maybe just that simple act of listening and offering him a little kindness, maybe that was the thing that really spurred that transformation in him.
It really highlights the power of individual relationships.
Mhm.
Even in such a structured place as Changi, it shows that even in a system that's focused on punishment, there's still room for compassion, and that human connection can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up our deep dive today, it's the resilience of those individuals like Grayson and Kai that really stays with me. Their drive to find meaning and purpose in the midst of all that hardship is truly inspiring.
Yeah, they remind us that even when faced with huge adversity, the human spirit is strong, it can endure, even find a path towards growth. But their journey isn't over, right? It doesn't end at those prison gates.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what happens when they are released. How does society welcome them back? What can we do to really support their reintegration and help reduce the chances that they'll end up back in prison?
It's definitely something to think about. I mean, their stories offer such a unique glimpse into the complexities of justice, of punishment, and really that potential for rehabilitation. And, as you go about your day, maybe these insights will spark some interesting conversations, challenge some assumptions, and really lead to a deeper understanding of the human stories that are behind those walls of Changi Prison.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.